Awesome. Right, great. Now that all the tech is organized, we're going to be talking a little bit about engagement. And so there's probably two different ways to talk about engagement. You can talk about it in terms of a proactive and a reactive way. So it's like, how do we engage kids in proactive measures so that kids and youth and young adults are being engaged already off the cuff before anything goes wrong? Or there's reactive, where it's like, how do we re-engage kids once things have gone a bit haywire and a bit skewed? So we're just going to introduce the topic of engagement today, and then in the next training sessions, probably one more this year and then into next year, we're going to have a look at just different ways to manage people, manage room space, manage different ministry things so that we can really engage people, because without engagement, I don't think discipleship happens, because it's like no one's listening, no one's caring. We'll talk a little bit more about what engagement is, but there's no attendance, so there's no discipleship that takes place. Also, when people are not engaged, there's not as much fun, there's not as much listening, there's more misbehavior. So engagement is like a really critical thing for us as a team, just to go, okay, how do we manage this? Like, well, how do we behave in such a way that people are engaged so that we see discipleship takes place, worship takes place. Engagement can look like all the different components of what we do, whether it's group discussion, whether it's worship, whether it's games, the whole spectrum of like engagement we're really wanting to see happen. So what I thought would be great before we started doing this whole idea of engagement is that we would experience it a little bit of like engagement. And a lot of what I'm going to be sharing is what I learned from a PD through school, which is like talks about classroom management and how that all works. And so I've just basically copied and pasted a lot of my notes and said thank you very much for that. But what we're going to do is, in terms of engagement, what we're going to stand up and we're going to line up in a line from, actually use this wall, line up in a line from people who feel like they struggle with engagement the most, or that they're not as confident in engaging people, through to people who feel like they're the most confident in engaging people and kids, youth, young adults. Yeah? So we're going to line up from one side to the other. We're going to stand up. This requires like standing up. This is not a test. This is not a values judgment on how good you are. This is just how confident you feel in that area. Like when it comes to engagement. Today, my confidence is like a bit of an outline here. Come on. Very good. All right. Okay. Let's try and single file line. Let's just sort of get in, blend in a little bit. That's great. Okay. So we have people who feel least confident through to most confident. This is not a who's actually the most or least engaging. It's just what you think, right? So it's very subjective. Great. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fold the line. So Donna, do you want to come down here, and the line sort of follows Donna down to Angela. Great. And so then you'll basically be facing someone. Sure. Yep. Okay, great. Is everyone's pretty paired up?
Oh, okay.
Mostly? Yeah, great. Excellent. So then what we'll do is we'll take the two from each end, will form a table. So we're gonna rearrange. So Donna and Angela and Adeline and CT, you guys form a group. Find a table. This is great. Tina, Kirsten, JC, So yeah, just grab a table.
Sorry guys,
you might need to move some stuff around a little bit. Della, Jenny, May, and Sunray, find a table. And in 5, you guys can have.
We're going to find a table.
5. Yeah. So yeah, let's just shuffle around the table real quick. Thank you. All right, so what we have here is we have, very good, got 4 tables of 4, 1 with 5, that's okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to do an exercise. And the goal is to design and create an aeroplane that is going to fly the longest, right? So you just got to keep that airplane in the air the longest, right? Each person in your team has a critical role to play. So you're going to have to designate one person to be the designer. So the designer is someone who comes up with the blueprints for the plane, right? So you need to have a designer. You need to have 2, a builder. So someone who's actually going to build the plane, right? You're going to need to have someone who's the resource manager / pilot. So the resource manager, they get the paper, they get the pens, they get the scissors if that's required. It's just 1 piece of paper per team, right? So just make sure you execute well. And then the 4th person is the namer / explainer. So you're going to explain it to the group, like what the name of the plane is, and explain why the design is so good, right? Excellent. In the table of 5, you might change the namer and explainer might be 2 people. The designated namer and explainer. Great. So what you have is you have exactly 5 minutes to get this done. Actually, less than 5 minutes. You've got 3 minutes. You've got the resources there. You got scissors, you got a pen, and you got paper. What about just leave it flat?
Yeah. high jump bit.
Yeah, so you have to like hold it up.
Yeah, I love this for me. Okay, so we said
Instead of like throwing,
yeah.
let's see if we do this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
That's my thing.
Just dry.
Yes, it's dry one side and another one. Is it from that?
Alright, we've got 1 minute to go, so you better get folding, make sure that your plane is complete.
Can we make one or test it?
Yeah, make it like this. This is how I make it.
Suddenly,
I don't know. It's big. It's quite big. It's big.
so I don't know what like. Let's be alright. Let's be alright. Let's be alright. I don't. You have to get it like right, so actually.
Alright, we got 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
I thought about it too much.
20 seconds. 10 seconds. 9.
You're kind of fast.
1, and we are done. Very good. So can I get your namer/explainer and your pilot to come up?
Oh, that is the aeroplane.
And who's the explainer? And who's the pilot? Yeah. The resource manager is the pilot. Resource manager is the pilot as well. That's. We got to do a demo, right?
Oh, jeez. He just said it has to say the everyone.
Is this your plane?
Yeah.
All right. No judgment. Here we go. Actually, I need to get a better vantage point so I can
That's what he
see.
said. He didn't say house to fly.
All right. I said I wouldn't have said flies the furthest if we had a bigger space, but because of time, I was going to get
right?
because we're not going to go outside and whatever.
Okay.
It's the plane that stays in the air the longest. Yeah, that was the flies the longest, as in in the air. All right. So what we're going to do is we're just going to hear from the explainers, and then we're going to fly these things all at the same time. We're going to release them. And then we're going to see which one stays in the air the longest. It could be a tricky task, but all right.
Switch on the
You wanted to get in a current. All right. Okay. Maybe if we all stand back like this, and then the explainers for each team just step forward, one step, so that we can see who they are. Yeah, great. Let's start with Donna, and then we'll work our way this way.
Here we have the Spirit 2020, specially handcrafted by Angela. It glides, it's white, it's matte, it's great. Give it a go.
Don't throw it yet. All test flights to the air. Alright. Very good, very excellent. I like it.
Alright, so we've gone with the thing of staying in the air the longest. So we've got like a helicopter. But it's got a plane on it, right? So it's got a plane. Oh, yeah, so it is an aeroplane, but it's got like helicopter.
What's its name?
Team number 1.
Air Force One, great. Okay, next up, what plane do we have?
Okay, this plane's name is called God's Angel.
Oh.
It's been built with a really strong tip. I've heard from some experienced mothers that that's what it takes to have a really good plane. Yes.
Excellent. And what do we have at the end here?
So we have this thing, not thing, a special weapon called the gladiator.
Oh!
Gladiator, right? Can fly from Perth to Rome. Not just that, because it's not just one piece of paper, we fold it into half, so it's a bulletproof. So sturdy. Looking at, from there and here, probably the most modern plane on the top of it. Not just that, okay? There is this cross here. This cross has a special power. So when you fly the plane, it actually shows the cross as you fly it, and so the world can see how great Jesus is. Leave the best for the last, right?
That's clearly impossible. Yeah. Alright, so hand over the planes to the pilots. Pilots got it. Alright, when I count down from 3 to 1, then release it at go. Let's do that. Ready? So 3, 2, 1, go. Small beginnings, or because they'll come back to bite you. Would not trust it with my life, but that was great. Did win the competition. Very good. All right, so we're going to just talk a little bit about engagement. That was a bit of a demonstration that I'll come back to, look back at the end. But we're going to talk about engagement, what it is, the different types of engagement, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a guy called Mazzano, who has these 4 questions that he basically questions on engagement. So that's where we're going. But let's go with the first slide, which is basically sometimes we confuse certain behaviors with engagement, which often we do that by confusing compliance with engagement. So just because kids or youth or young adults are sort of they're not causing trouble, it doesn't mean they're necessarily engaged. So there was this pipeline research done through, I'm pretty sure it was ECU, and they did a lot of surveys around classrooms, so this is more of an educational setting, but they said in every classroom there was a basic breakup of these 4 people groups. The first people group is 8%, which is uncooperative. They're sort of the people that are they're just causing trouble, and they're like, it's significant trouble, it's not just like minor issues. 12% of kids are low-level disruptive, or so that's where they're sort of doing things, they're sort of pushing the boundaries, but they're not really doing anything overly bad, but they're just sort of not helping the dynamic of the room. Then 20% are these compliant, disengaged kids. So this is like where they don't say anything, they don't do much, they just sort of sit there because they're quote-unquote good kids. And then finally there's about 60% that are generally engaged and they're switched on and focused with what's happening. So this pipeline research talks about there's 2 main management ways in how to deal with these 4 groups of people. The first 2 generally have a different strategy to apply to this, so this is more of a reactionary thing that we need to implement. And then the second 2, the 20% and the 60%, is generally caught up in this idea of proactive engagement. Like if we have this critical mass of 80% of the room, we generally have a great culture that we can set and I guess work with. So what we're going to be talking about is how do we capture this 80%, and we'll have another session on the the 20% that might need a little bit more strategy and skill and discipline and behavior management, all that sort of stuff. But before we get into talking about a framework for engagement. What kinds of engagement? Let's just a bit of group discussion, not in your groups, but as a group. What kind of things, what types of engagement are there? So when we're thinking of engagement, what sort of engagement do we have? How about we discuss in our groups and we'll bring it back into the broader group. Engagement. So like when you think engagement, what are you looking for when it comes to engagement?
Like when you ask questions, just so you want to, or even like volunteering. They want to be on stage.
All right, let's bring it back. What were some of the things you guys discussed on your tables? What were some things that you sort of see when it comes to engagement? This is what the different types of engagement, what you're looking for. Attentive? Yep. Yeah, there's that attention.
We talked about being actively participating, so like answering questions, doing activities.
Yep. Yep. So it's like behavioral engagement. Yeah, you can sort of see there's a behavior involved with it. Yep. Any others? Any other thoughts? So talkative.
Disengagement, daydreaming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having the spectrum for the active engagement versus disengaged person.
Yeah, like how many colors are on this wall? Yeah. Yeah, okay, so when it comes to like engagement, there's, I guess, different types of engagement. We've talked about a few like around behavioral stuff. So behavioral things are like attendance, like that's like an engagement, or level of on-task activity. So that's sort of like this idea of, you know, we've set a task and the task is getting done, as opposed to some kids getting their head beat over here, and these guys are just keep playing foosball, and these guys are wandering in the hallway, whatever. So that's sort of like the behavioral side of things. There's also emotional engagement. So emotional engagement sort of measures this idea of like level of connectedness or belonging. So when people are engaged, it's not just on a behavioral level, but it's on a relational level. So there's like emotions that happen. So when we see highly engaged people, there's generally a group identity. So there's a level of, hey, we are Flame Senior, or we are Flame Junior, or we are Sonlife Youth, or we are Sonlife Young Adults. So there's this level of connectedness, belonging, and positive cohesiveness, which is another big word. And there's another level of engagement, which is cognitive engagement. So it's the whole thinking side of things, which we talked about, like disengagement being daydreaming, where it's like where kids and people are thinking about problem solving and thinking about critical thinking and thinking about how, in our discussions around maybe Bible studies and different things, it's like, the Trinity, kids might be asking about, what's the Trinity? How do you understand that? And there's this like problem solving, and that's where you can see like there's a high level of engagement cognitively. And then obviously there's this level of spiritual engagement where Sarah talked a little bit about worship. When we're worshiping, there's certain things that we can see. They're praying, they're singing loudly, passionately. There's a sense of worship and wanting to connect with God. So there's this sort of spiritual engagement. So there's like 4 general categories. I'm sure that there's more categories. I'm sure that there's more things we could talk about. But we're going to move now to like this framework for engagement. And I'm sure most of us have heard this like phrase. It's like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So the question for us is, how do we make people thirsty? How do we make what we do inviting or thought-provoking or interesting, so that there's this level of, oh, you know, I want to know God. I want to be discipled. Like, I want to be mentored and grow in my faith. So Robert Nazzano, he came up with these 4 questions which are around engagement. And he says, the 4 questions are, how do I feel? Am I interested? Is this important? And can I do this? So those are the 4 questions that we'll just spend the rest of our time on. I'll just talk through real briefly. And then we can ask questions as we go and have a bit of discussion. And the first question is, how do I feel? People will rationalize what they feel. So in the brain, we feel something and then we create an argument for it. Oftentimes, you know, when you're having a discussion with a kid, they might feel a certain way. Then you ask them why you're doing that, and then you'll see, I've got to come up with an excuse. I've got to come up with like a reason for what I'm doing. We do this all the time, even like as adults. It's like you do something because you wanted to do it, and then someone says, hey, why'd you do that? And you're like, oh, because of this, this, and this. And it can be more educated, but that's generally like, oftentimes we're just kidding ourselves, right? It's like, you know, I want to do this because I want to do it. That's not a good enough excuse, so we have to come up with a smart excuse for a reason for why we do things. So this whole concept of how do we feel? So when we're creating spaces, there's certain things that contribute to feelings, right? There's the physical environment. There's a physical space where, actually, I'm not gonna talk monologue. Discussing your tables. What are certain things that affect your mood, feelings? Have a brief discussion.
Causes you, but you bring it and then you come.
All right, very good. Why don't we stand up, just where we are. Let's stand up. All right, and I'm assuming that everyone's got something to share around this idea of what contributes towards how we feel. And if someone gives an answer that you have, you can sit down. Okay? Does that make sense? Right? So I'll start with CT. What's one thing that contributes towards feelings? How you feel?
You talked about like family life, so like basically before you come to church, like how you feel.
Yeah, family life. That's good, that's true. But let's talk about in the realms of what we have control over, so to speak. Because it's easy to talk about like a lot of things outside, but let's just talk about the way we run things, the certain, I'm giving things away now, so.
Like technology probably.
Okay.
Sometimes like that's also
Yeah, okay, yeah. So there's a whole heap of frustration and feelings and that kind of thing. Great, technology, great. Excellent, CT can sit down. Anyone had technology? Great, still lots of options. Jenny?
I said the temperature in the room sometimes because kids get quite hot or quite cold, that affects like
Absolutely, spot on. Anyone else have the weather / artificial weather? that's absolutely true. Yeah, absolutely. If it's too hot, very lethargic, very tired. If it's too cold, it's, you know, jittery and whatever. Perfect. Great, still heaps of options. Donna?
Other people.
Yep.
Like, I don't know, other people's moods, and that might bounce off. And if they're in a bad mood, then you might impact.
Yeah, great. Other people's moods, our moods, the peers in the group's moods. Yep, great. Anyone else had that sort of? Great, excellent. Still heaps of options. All right, Jason, what have you got?
I feel hungry or sleepy.
Yeah, okay. Probably less out of our control, sort of in our control, the hungry thing, but the sleepy thing, we can't really control that yet. Well, I mean, what? We can buy some day beds or something.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, as in, yeah, for us leading certain things, yeah.
Okay,
I mean, we can talk in our programs about having good sleep and stuff like that. Yeah, no, that's good. Excellent. Amazing.
We talked about just the atmosphere of the room itself, like how you set it up, the energy in the room.
Yeah.
Some people use the room for
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Atmosphere in the room, spacing, where things are. That's huge. I know that from this training day, one of the teachers was talking about how a kid had some traumatic experience in small spaces, and one of the rooms was really cluttered, and there was like lots of things hanging from the ceiling and that kind of thing, and basically the kid was always misbehaving in that particular classroom only. And so it was like, oh, well, actually we need to think about the space and how things are arranged so that it's not claustrophobic and tight and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a very good one. Sarah? Noise? Yep, that's right. Classic. If you've got kids signing in, it's a classic example. Kids signing in, it's noisy, it becomes overwhelming or scary, that kind of thing. Alternatively, like if a youth comes to a youth night, it's dead quiet and everything's like, what's going on? Like, is Jesus alive? I don't know. We're still acting like he's dead. Yeah, that's significant, right? Yeah, definitely. Noise, volume, the right kind of noise, when there's noise, that kind of thing, really important. Yeah, great. Anyone else have noise? Yep, excellent. Jamie?
The kind of activities that we have for the kids.
Yeah.
And if it's kind of fun, then they will be really into it. If not, then they'll just control themselves.
Absolutely. Like age-appropriate activities is so important. Yeah, definitely. Other one, Kirsten?
Probably something happened before they came, or like, and then that could affect their feelings. Like when they come and like,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the whole relational thing, or maybe it's other things. Yeah, definitely. Very good. Sunray?
I said their level of social connectedness with the other kids, something like that. If they have no friends and then probably wouldn't come.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think I did this PD called Friendology, which is another thing that I'd love to talk about, but we're not going to go into that. But they did this research around kids who don't want to come to school, and 90% of kids who don't want to come to school is to do with friendship-related issues. And so, like sick days and all those sort of things, stomach problems seem to happen whenever this kid is having a fight with another kid or there's problems. And I think that's really important, is how do we foster that friendship and that others connectedness within our groups, because if we're trying to just engage them as people without seeing the underlying challenges that they're having socially, yeah, absolutely, we're fighting a crazy battle. Excellent. I think a couple of other things is like pacing. Pacing is really important for engagement. If things are too quick, it becomes disorienting. But if things are too slow, it becomes like, oh, what's happening? Anyone have any ideas on the average attention span for a pre-adolescent?
3 minutes. Depends on the age.
3 minutes.
Like 7-year-old, 7 minutes, 8-year-old, 8 minutes.
Yeah. So there's a bit of a range. Obviously, if we're talking school-age kids, it's like 5 to 10. If we're talking younger, we're talking less. Yeah. But absolutely. Does anyone have an idea of post-adolescence, like the average attention span? It's reducing, like all of our attention spans are reducing significantly due to social media and that kind of thing. Like we're all slowly becoming dumber. No, I'm joking. But 10 to 20 minutes is what the talk is. the average attention span of someone post-adolescence. So that's for the rest of us. We all generally have to be changing things. You can think about what we do just in our everyday life. We're generally moving quite quickly a lot of the time, and everything's quite stimulated. So pacing is really important. Physical movement is really important. So when we're doing things, having people sit for a long period of time is quite, it can negatively impact feelings and emotions. So oftentimes, say if you've got group activities, you might want to rotate the students, not the work. So instead of having like what we have here, like this sort of thing, and then I give you work, it might be the work stays there, and then you guys get up and you move to here, we do a rotation sort of thing. We sort of did a little bit of that. You sort of saw that we sort of stood up and did a few things. But moving people, not work, is one way. You could do something where you have instructions on a mat, and then you do the activity off the mat, or you might move around to certain pockets of the room for certain things. And like what we've done in this room, we were doing worship, the orientation of the room is this way, we've moved it this way, we might move it back that way, but we just keep changing things up, because obviously as soon as something stays the same, it then becomes like white noise, or you don't see it, and then all of a sudden, people are like, oh, this is just the same. I just feel like, oh, this just feels the same. There's a lot of other different ways. Drama you can use in terms of engagement, physical representation. So if we want to get people to display something, get them to do that physically. Facilitate sharing, corners activities, stretch breaks, go noodle. I don't know if you've heard of go noodle before. There's a lot of things. Even with the younger kids, sometimes you can get like a soft toy that you can pass around the room, that kind of thing, that just becomes one of those things that kids are talking in turns, and it sort of seems to work. With older kids, it might be not a soft toy, it might be something else. But it just helps visually for kids to take in turns and see whose turn it is and where things work. I think visual aids are really significant, like with kids, but with youth, with everyone. It's like, okay, so this is how we do it, this is what we do. I was at an athletics carnival just recently, and you can't just say, stay a meter away from the racetrack, because we said that a few times, and we actually set up flags, and it's like, okay, this is a line you can't cross, and even then, they'll push it a bit, but at least it's very clear. Like, so just setting up visible, physical things is really helpful. The second question is, am I interested? So this is a question around attention, and people will decide quickly if they're interested in something, and then they'll disengage or engage relating on that. And basically, once we've decided or made a decision, we don't change very easily, right? Like, I think you can all have certain experiences. So sometimes, I'll use Judah as an example. Judah, when we first came to Sonlife, he had a great experience in Little Sparks a couple times, and then a balloon popped in the room. And then he decided that this place is hell. Like, he decided that, he was like, I hate this place. Like, this is not a safe place. And he made up his mind. Like, he was interested, and he's like, no longer interested. And that was a journey. Like, we were just wrestling for months. And finally we got there, and Judah, Judah, he's like, he loves everything Sonlife Kids. But there's these moments where it's like, if we don't capture people right at the gate, like when they're new, when they're fresh, then they make a decision, and then we have to work really hard to try and work back. And I think we can think of certain youth or certain kids or certain young adults that may have come to one of the things that we've done, and they go, this is not a good experience, and from now on, this is what it's going to be forever, and I'm not going to engage anymore in the same way. And so then, I guess for us, when new people are coming, it's really important that we go, hey, how can we make this a great experience so we're not having to rework the bad stuff? But then for people who have already made up their minds, we have to work really hard to keep provoking thought, keep drawing them in, and getting them interested. How do we do that? Some things, friendly controversy is good. So obviously there might be a skit where there's a relational issue. Recently I speak at assembly at the primary school that I work at, and one of the deputy principals and I, we had a fight, and there was this controversy and we resolved the fight, but the kids from the last 3 months have been saying, oh, you know, have you sorted it out with so-and-so? And they're really, really interested, really engaged, and I think that is one of the key things is like we can do is just create a bit of controversy, fun, friendly, not bad controversy. Introducing unusual information, like there's so much unusual information that we can give. Just recently you will have noticed I've been reading up on my pirate jokes because I've just been drip feeding a whole heap of pirate jokes like to kids and sort of building that anticipation for it, and they're so bad, the jokes, but it's just one way that engages. And it was a classic example when I came back the second week, one of the kids stood up and the joke was like a 2-3 minute joke, and he shared it like word for word back to everyone. Like he was totally engaged, he was switched on. I was like, man, and this guy sometimes not always engaged. So it was just like one of those things where I go, that's really great. Like it's like thought-provoking jokes, humor, arts, whatever you can use. Like it does provoke interest. Questioning increases that response rate. The whole shared learning thing, like oftentimes, even in this group, people were not so keen to share just openly, like their thoughts and that kind of thing. So get them in a group, discuss real quick, come back, and then there's always lots to share, but sometimes there's just certain things that we need to spark interest to get people engaged. And then there's the whole idea of grouping people. Grouping people is really important. Like having some groups are better than having no groups at all. And we see that with some of our, in Flame Senior and in Flame Junior, we sort of group them a little bit with different ages, but it's a really good way to group kids because, do I have that there? No. Because it creates this sense of interest and teamwork and camaraderie and connectedness. And so there's different types of groups. I'm actually not going to talk a whole lot around that, but can anyone guess how, so actually I'll just share this. There's homogenous groups, so like the same types of people in a group. So that's like, you might have the academic kids in one group, you might have the less academic kids in one group, you might have the sporty kids in one group, and then that's sort of like, or you might have boys, girls. So it's like single, same ability groups. Then there's like student choice groups. So it's like they selected, so kids within the groups, they select their groups. That can be a bit brutal sometimes. Then you get the heterogeneous groups, which is like, it's a mix. So it's mixed abilities and skills. And then there's random groups where it's just like pulling out of a hat or 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever like that. Often what they say is heterogeneous groups are the most productive groups. So what we've created here, based on what we did here, is we've created a group dynamics with different people from different pockets of competency, so to speak. And normally the people who are a bit higher achievers, they help out the lower achievers, and then the middle range guys, they sort of stabilize the group from there being too many arguments and that kind of thing. So like, that's like a great way. Obviously in our dynamics we split up in ages, but let's think about just how we break groups up in terms of, I guess, people who might be in certain things or might have great Bible knowledge with people who might not have so great knowledge, so that we see that cross-pollination between groups. Yeah, excellent. So then the third question is this important? And we must ground people in why. Like when we first started this topic on engagement, I just shared why. It's so important for discipleship that people are engaged. Like if we want our kids, youth, young adults to be engaged in anything, we need to have a good reason why, and it needs to be relevant. So for us, like why is church important? Like we need to have an answer for that. We need to have a reason for that. Why is the Bible important? Like, why should we read this? Because there's a lot of assumptions that we go, oh yeah, kids know that this is important. Like, actually, let's give them a reason why. Why is worship important? Why is the teaching component? Why is this training important? Like, all of these things, there's clear whys, and if we're not communicating the whys and just doing it, then it's easy for kids to go, or youth or young adults to go, oh yeah, we just do it, and there's not really a point. But actually there is a point, right? There's a whole reason why we're here. And sometimes phrases like, if we don't do this, the consequence will be this, or, I mean, that's a negative sort of connotation, but we do this because this is the outcome. So it attaches meaning to what we're doing. And then obviously showing the benefits of what we do. So this is why we're doing this, and pointing out like the great things that this has caused. And then the last question is, can I do this? And this is really where we're going to finish, and which is, we can set the parameters for our success. So whenever you give an exercise or activity or do something, you want to create the parameters so that there will be success, so that people will engage. And you want everyone to engage, you don't want just a few people to engage. So based on what we did right at the start, chat in your groups, how did we see this happen with our airplane demo? How did, like, that's sort of, we just sort of made that out of nowhere, right? How was that effective in engaging people? What sort of elements were there involved with it? How did people get kept on task? Discuss.
I think that helps engage people.
That's true.
Yeah.
What covers on task is also time. I felt like time running out, we had to do something. So his question was, the effective thing, like what made it the whole activity. Like we are not, we're all
Yeah. Right.
I think it's a bit tired.
All right, let's bring it back in. Let's bring it back in. So obviously, I'm gonna get you guys to share some of your thoughts in a second. But obviously, if something is unachievable for someone, they'll disengage just like that. The classic example for me is with Judah and Asher, because I see that all the time, every day. We go to a park and we have a soccer ball. Soccer ball's great, it's fun. Asher's kicking the ball, then Judah takes the ball, kicks it, and then Asher walks off and starts crying. And it's like, great. So what's just happened? It's no longer achievable for Asher to take the ball off Judah because he's too fast and he's too strong. So then Asher disengages, and then we've got like a lose-lose where Judah's got this ego and pride, Asher doesn't want to play. What do I do? So what are some things that could help me out, or could help just how we're working with people out when we want people to feel like they can achieve stuff, group work, that kind of thing. What did you discuss? What did we do with the airplane? Speak up.
Different jobs.
Different jobs, yep. Different roles. Yep, yeah, absolutely. Different roles, and we had continuous roles. Did you notice, like, the roles, it wasn't just like, I'm the resource manager, now I'm not going to do anything else, but they came back as the pilot. The designer has to work with the builder. So yeah, there's sort of like a network of things going on there. It's not just like, yeah, one role and then that's it. Yep. What's the next? What's another thing? I think there's like 7 things, so just feel free to launch them out. The quicker you launch them out, then...
We said there was a time limit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Outside force, like an external opposition. So maybe it's an opponent, maybe it's a time. You know, the minute to win the games are great for that. You know, they set like a great parameter. Absolutely. It could be real, it could be artificial. Yeah. Other things?
Is the skill level, the skill level something that everyone can achieve?
Skill level?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, there was a skill level. Obviously, the type of activity was something that was achievable for us highly competent kids, youth, young adults, workers. There was a goal, right? We had a goal to it. So it was like to build the airplane that stayed in the air the longest. So that was a clear goal. That was helpful. We had the responsibility. We had limited resources. I think that's really key. When you have so much resources, so maybe everyone gets a piece of paper, then everyone's just going to do their own thing. But you limit the resources down so that people have to work together and there needs to be some teamwork happening. The incentive and reward, I didn't really give it an incentive and reward, probably just the glory for A1. Yeah. And then the outside force is the last thing, and then finally is like simulation role play. We actually did it, like we got to do it, and that was sort of something that's like, oh yeah, we all did it, we all feel good, you know. We realised these guys cheated, but this plan was probably the best, and we're all happy. So I guess this is just like a really quick rush through in terms of engagement, but basically like when we're thinking about running things, have a think of these ideas. How is this environment and space making us feel? Like, is there energy? Is there fun? Is it somewhere where you want to be? And then is it interesting? Like, are you sharing things, or is there a bit of controversy or group stuff that happens so that there's this interest? Have a look at how we keep sharing the meaning for what we're doing. Like, it's really important. In church world language, we call it sharing the vision. But share the vision for everything, right? We're here because of this. We worship because of that. We're teaching right now because we think it's so important for this. Really important. Keep coming back to the meaning. And it's just as much important for us as it is for the people we lead. We need to keep reminding ourselves, why is it we do what we do? Otherwise, we'll stop doing it. And then finally, can I achieve it? How are we creating like these parameters, whether it's a little goal or a little thing, to see that we achieve a certain level of success and don't see people disengage because it just becomes just murky. And you can see that with kids too, like when there's no roles or there's no goal, kids kind of just sort of go, you know, like this is more interesting over here. So I found this super encouraging. I found this like something for me that I was like, wow, I've never been in the education system. There's so much that goes into it, and there's so much more. But I hope this is just helpful, just to get our minds thinking around these areas. And this just then leads into as we're prepping things, as we're thinking about things, how do we create stuff so that we would see a high level engagement in our ministry? Great work, guys. That's all I had. Thanks for all your engagement. Be blessed, and let me pray before we finish. Father, I just want to thank you for the fact that you have given us over 100 people to care for, love in the Next Gen ministry. And I just want to thank you so much for the huge responsibility and task it is to each week disciple, love, teach, and equip our young people to live in this world. Help us not to do this with lightheartedly in a flippant way, but help us to be really wise in how we use the time that we've been given. And Father, would you each go with us now, love us and be with us, our families, as we seek to glorify you in every area of our life outside of our church commitments and ministry. In Jesus' name, amen.